Hey everyone, this is Zephyr with another installment in our Foundry Basics series, this time on journal entries. We'll go over the different functions of our journals directory over here, as well as the tools in the Journal Notes toolbox. To start, we're going to go over how to create a basic journal entry. From our journal entries directory, we can create folders, such as this example folder, and then we can select create entry. You don't have to have a folder for this, but it's easier if you're staying organized. Notice that when I create this entry with my title, I have a second dropdown to determine the folder that it will be living in. As soon as I save it, it will pop into the correct folder, and from there we can reopen it anytime we like. Notice that to edit it, initially there's nothing there, so you'll have to click on this pencil icon to edit the journal entry. From here, this is a fairly basic WYSIWYG style editor. We have drop downs for different formatting, as well as different toggles for various bits of formatting. So, just as an example, I'm typing in a simple sentence, and from there we can actually save the entry and we can show it to players. I'll demonstrate this more in a bit, but all of my players that are logged in would have this pop up on their screen and they would see the text. You can also set an image for your journal entry. You can select this from your local files, so I'm just going to grab an icon of some sort from the Bailiwiki Premium Towns module, and I will use that as my image. You can use anything you want for your image. It might be good to use a map for a specific city if you're using that, or larger character art if this is about a specific encounter or NPC that your players are running into. And once you hit the check mark, then this image will appear. And you can cycle between the images and text using the toggles up at the top next to that Show Players button. We can also show the image to our players by selecting that button, and again toggle back and forth using the text and image buttons. So that, again, will show that image to all of my currently logged in players. Now that we've gone over that, let's make a basic entry here just to show off all the different functionalities. We have the standard, which is paragraph. We can also make this into a heading. You might want to use heading 1 for your title, and then you can write paragraphs after that. For most of the headings and several other of the formatting options, as soon as you hit return, your format will go back to paragraph. And as you would normally expect in a lot of different WYSIWYG and HTML editors, you have various levels of headings. So we have the one style for heading 1, different for heading 2, and going down to 3 and below, you generally just have a slightly larger font. We also have the classic font transforms of bold, italic, underline, etc. And we can toggle these using our keyboard shortcuts as well, using Ctrl B, U, and I for bold, underline, and italics respectively. It's Command B, U, and I if you are on a Mac. And you can use all of those transforms on the text. We also have some options that are not necessarily on keyboard shortcuts, such as superscript, which will be up above, and subscript, which is a lower, smaller font, strike through, etc., and a code, which is going to change the font to kind of this terminal-esque font. And all of those are toggles that are independent of each other. Superscript and subscript are the only ones that are mutually exclusive. We also have some options for block formatting. So for example, we can use this block quote, and that's going to create a nice line next to it and italicize the entire text without you having to use the actual italic formatting. As my example paragraph here states, this is great for adding descriptions, like maybe it's describing what an amulet looks like, but doesn't necessarily have to do with the functionality of the amulet. It's not something that players necessarily need to know to be able to use the item, but they might like it for a bit of flavor or a bit of extra information on what exactly it is that they're holding. In addition to the block paragraph, we also have the div option, and that is mostly useful whenever we go into code editing. I'll demonstrate that more later. And then we have the preset, for the blocks, and that is basically going to eliminate the text wrapping, and it's going to make it just go as long as it will, and you will have to scroll in order to see the end of that line. There's also the custom formatting, which kind of works similarly to the blocks, and it is called secret. What's special about this is that only owners of a journal entry are able to see this. When we get into permissions, we'll see a more visual demonstration, but this is a way that you can have your own notes on a journal entry that you'll show your players without them actually being able to read it. It's good for reminder text or things that maybe they have to pass a check to get this information, and then you can reveal it or read it aloud. And you can nest these formatting options together, so you can make a block quote inside of secret, etc. It is a little tricky when you're using secret or some of the block formatting. Generally speaking, I recommend that you make a few lines and edit a line below it and come back to wherever you're wanting to have that secret text if you're going to be doing that in the middle of a journal entry. That just makes it a little bit easier to keep things organized for yourself and be able to get down onto your next line quickly and easily. So, for example, if I was to write this knowing full well that it was going to have a secret block, I would go ahead and write the following paragraph and then turn the secret paragraph secret, just to make it easier on myself and not have to fight with all of my returns, etc. You can also create lists. So I'm going to use a bulleted list. So this is an unordered list. And the classic example to me is a grocery list. We're going to get some butter, milk, and eggs from the old general store here. We can then also do an ordered list. And we might need to remind ourselves of what we're supposed to do to start the day, such as buckling our shoes and shutting the door and picking up sticks. So you can use these toggles to add in ordered and unordered lists. And you can just hit return to start a new line with that list type and a second return to clear it and return to a regular paragraph. We can also insert images. If we go into our user data, we can select something from there. So again, I'll pick an icon. And I decide that I'm going to go up to use active tiles and select just a danger icon. The alt description is what will pop up when you hover over that image. So in this case, when I select danger, if I'm hovering over this later, it's going to say danger. This is mostly useful for accessibility reasons. You don't necessarily need this for your own personal use. And just like any other image, we can go back in and find an alternative and swap it out as we want. You'll notice that by default, the width and the height match the DPI or full size of the original image, but you can adjust it and upscale or downscale it as you see fit. You also are not limited to the images that you have in your Foundry installation. You can also use web links. So I just copied the image address of something off of a Google image search with this throne, and we can see that it pops up here. We do have this kind of interesting behavior in the journal entries that as you expand this box, you can't necessarily see all the way to the bottom, so I have to scroll around for that. I can also use a web link for the image of the journal entry. Useful if you're, say, using World Anvil to host images of your world. Now that we've explored that a bit, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this image so we have a little bit more space to work with. We can also add in tables. There's a variety of things that you might want to use a table for. I've used it in my own games as kind of a hacky calendar, so I'm going to do a really quick demonstration of that. I'll speed up the typing to spare you from that. And I'm just creating a very basic, Monday or Sunday through Saturday rather, calendar with the different dates. And just as we've seen, we can nest formatting in other places. We can nest that in our text editing as well. So we can actually go in and change the alignment from left, center, right, and justify to center all of this text. We could also bold it if we wanted and create kind of our own header style. And say there was something specific on Tuesday the 3rd. We can right click when we're in this cell and go down to the cell properties. And from here, we can configure exact widths, heights, scopes, etc. The scope determines how far a cell spans, but this isn't a comprehensive tutorial on tables, so that's for another time. Here what I'm really looking at is changing my border styles or colors, and I can set this background color to a red to indicate, oh, there's something important on Tuesday the 3rd. Maybe that's a deadline for a quest or something. We can also change properties of whole rows and columns, so I can make this top one a header style row, and it automatically has this nice centered, different colored formatting to provide emphasis. As with most WYSIWYG table editors, you're also able to add and subtract columns and rows both before and after, and you can use that to create the table of your dreams. You don't necessarily have to know the exact dimensions when you first select from that box up at the top, and this can allow you to add more rows and columns than the wizard initially provides. That is all I'm going to cover on tables for this particular video. So if you want to learn more about tables, definitely look into general table management in WYSIWYG editors and also in HTML at large. We have this nice horizontal line button that will just add a nice break if you want to separate areas of a journal entry. Maybe you want to have a line above where all of your secrets are going to be. Or maybe you just want to divide it out for some other reason and you don't want to use headings, or you want to use this in conjunction with certain headings. We can add as many of these as we like to separate things out, just whatever flows well for you. We can also add in links. So if we want to link to our world anvil, or if we want to link to, say, the BaileyWiki YouTube, then we can do that right here. Just copy and paste in your URL. And the title, again, is going to be what pops up when you hover over it. And the text to display is what you actually read. It's at current window or new window. I always prefer to select new window here. Otherwise, it can replace the entire window for your Foundry. And you don't want your players getting jumped out. You have to save the entry before you can click it, and my link popped up on my other monitor, but you can see that we opened up BaileyWiki YouTube, no problem, directly from this Foundry journal entry. So again, you can use that for linking all kinds of resources. Maybe it's even to a source book or a character sheet. The possibilities are endless. You can also clear text formatting. You'll notice that does not do anything on these links. And if I select everything and I use it again, it's just going to remove like the secret formatting, but it is not going to remove headings and titles, etc. The main use for this is probably to, again, get rid of that secret formatting and also get rid of bold or italics or underline that you don't want. We can also go into the source code option. And if you're familiar with HTML and CSS, this is going to look pretty familiar to you. We have our heading tags and paragraph tags, and this is where you can customize things further if you know a little bit of HTML or CSS. This is the area where if you have the HTML and CSS background, you can really customize things. You can tweak all of your table styles, etc. You can add custom styling to different parts of your journal entry. Note that some of those stylings might get overwritten because of Foundry's base formatting. And here's where we can take advantage of div. That's basically setting up a specific block of formatting for an HTML document. So I'm setting the little paragraph here with its own style. I'm going to make it a color blue. And that is going to give it this, again, blue color in the text. And this is a nice way to add extra function that you don't necessarily have in the WYSIWYG editor, but we've got it with the source code. If you want to save changes without clicking the save entry down here, there's also a button up at the top that will exit you out of the editor. And you'll notice that everything's saved just fine. But if we reopen the editor, that button is not available to us unless we have made some kind of change. You do still have to use the bottom button in order to close the editor in that case. And we can again use the show to players. And here is my player character taking a look, and you can see that our custom formatting came through, etc. No problems. And because they don't have permission to this journal entry, they don't see it in the sidebar. So it's important to note with show journal entries, it does not matter the permissions that players have. And I can do the same with this image. And again, even though my player does not have permission to view this journal entry normally, using show players, they can see it, but they still won't see secrets. So now let's make a quick example here. I'm going to come up with some kind of scenario in this mill. There is some sort of sabotage, there's a plot to destroy it, and the players are tasked with investigating to find whatever the device is that's going to blow it up. So I'm going to speed up through the different journal creation processes here. The first one, I'm just making a grindstone with a generic anyone who's in the room could understand observation, and then I'm going to put another one in the secret option that I might hide from my players or make them make a check for. And this is a way you can kind of create this pre-planned out exploration type of encounter rather than having a combat. I can drag in this journal entry from my sidebar, and we'll see we have the journal entry, the text label, and I can adjust the X and Y coordinates, and I can set those to whatever I like. And that's going to be the center. So at the 4,000, 3,000, it's going to be on the intersection of two grid lines rather than being in the middle of a grid. So I can just put that back. You can also select the entry icon. There's a variety of options here, and I'm going to go with the windmill because I'm not very creative. I can also adjust the icon size. Putting it up to 100 then fills a whole grid space in my current grid size. And there we go. If you're ever curious of what icons mean what and you want a visual representation, you can go into your core data, icons, and SVG folder to view all of them. You won't be able to select all of these without an extra module, but you'll be able to look at what each of them are and see the image instead of having to go through, select it, update the journal note, find another one, update it, etc. So it's a much faster way to reference this. If I double left click on the journal entry from anywhere, it's going to open up the entry. It does not matter what tool set I'm on, whether that's actors or tiles or the journal notes themselves. If I double right click though, I am not able to open it and configure the map note itself unless I am in the journal notes tool. So right clicking it allows me to edit the settings. There is this toggle notes display button. It's a purple toggle. You'll notice that when I turn that off, I can no longer see it outside of my journal notes tool. Turning it back on then makes my journal notes visible whenever I am on a scene, regardless of whether I'm looking at journal notes. So it's very useful if you want players to reference them quickly, or if I want to reference them quickly. And also clear notes if, say, I hate the formatting I put on that. In my case, I'm going to bring this back in and go ahead and reselect that windmill icon. And we've got the same journal entry. Notice on the text label that this gray text is the default and it will match the journal entry. So if I type in grindstone here and update it, it doesn't look like anything's changed because it matched the journal entry. If we update it to the example, it still reads as grindstone rather than example entry. If I delete it, it will revert back to displaying the name of the journal entry. We can also adjust the tinting of our map note icon. I like this green for a lot of different high visibility notes that I want. And we can adjust the text color. This is going to adjust kind of the body of the text, but it won't adjust the outline. The outline is always going to be white. And we can change the font to something like Arial Black. There's a few different options. And we can adjust where the text is anchored. By default, it's always going to be on bottom, but depending upon where your journal entry is positioned, or what kind of journal entry, you might want to anchor it somewhere else, so it looks more like you're reading off of a sign, or it's replacing the button. Now that I've created this first note, I want to create a new one, like a warning, as soon as the players enter there, as kind of the prompt for this little exploratory or investigatory encounter here. So again, I'm going to speed through the typing of this, but the gist of it is that I'm going to be giving the players a prompt about having to investigate the windmill to find whatever device is going to destroy it. So there will be notes around that they need to interact with in order to find out about the device that is going to sabotage or otherwise destroy this windmill. I'm going to have a few different notes sprinkled about, including that grindstone one that we just created together. And I'll put part of this in secret, and I can use that out loud, or I can go ahead and change that later. This is mostly for demonstration. I'm using a big red skull to kind of grab players' attentions. And I'm going to speed through this note creation process as I create several different ones. I'm adding in crates, and I'm just going to use a generic barrel look and set it to yellow. I'm using this color coding for later when I'm going to configure very specific permissions for everything so that I can show you what all of the different permissions look like when I'm creating this. You can get as detailed with this process or as bare bones as you like. Some people don't really like to use the color coding or don't really like to bother with the different icons. It's completely up to you. There is no wrong way to go about this. You also don't even necessarily need to use journal entries as a part of this type of encounter, and you don't need to use them as a player-facing option for this type of adventure or quest. It's just another tool to have in your arsenal. And this is another example where I am using this secret thing. I want to show you too that if I double click and open the journal entry from a note, if I add text to it and save it from there, it is still opening and editing the exact same entry that is in my journals directory. It does not matter that I have edited it from a map note. It is still the same journal entry. So any changes made by accessing a journal entry via a map note is exactly the same as making any changes through the journals directory. They're effectively the same button in two different places. And I'm showing off again that we can adjust where those anchor points are. I've made these few different places, and now I'm going to make another one titled Sacks to throw off my players, make them look a little different, and you'll notice that I can set this exact same name and type out a separate journal entry. So journal entries don't need to have unique names. There is an ID that is associated with them and hidden within the console, but that's outside the scope of this particular video. We'll see that if we compare our two notes, the top one is the one that we created first with that little line of secret text. So the most recent entry is always going to be the one further down in the list because it has a higher value in its ID and it sorts from lowest to highest in terms of IDs. So now we've created a lot of these different notes. This is mostly the encounter I want. So let's take a look from what the player can see. Well, the player can't see anything. Even if we go into our journal entries, there's nothing there. So to do this, we have to change the permissions. First, we have the default way through configure permissions on a limited note-by-note basis. We can select that for all players or an individual player. I only have one player for this world, so it's not a very long list of who gets affected. You'll notice that the all players dropdown is missing that default option. Individual players that are set to default is going to reflect the permissions for all players as opposed to the individual name. You'll see when I open up the permission configuration for a folder, it specifically says no change. So this is what I'm setting for the entire folder. I'm pushing that permission off. So I've changed it to limited. And now each of these journal entries is limited. And you'll notice that for my player, I can now see all of these different icons, but I can't click on them to open their journal entries. You'll also notice that this player can't see the journal entries outside of the Journal Notes tab, or tool rather. They have to click on this toggle notes display icon in order to see it outside of the Journal Notes tool. You'll also notice that the color is slightly different in the Journal Notes tool versus the Actors tool. That is because the journal notes are affected by lighting and vision slightly when they are not in the Journal Notes tab. And again, my player, no matter what is selected, they are not able to open these limited vision journal entries. They also can't see them in the journal entries directory. My GM view, I can double check these permissions, and again, they're all set to limited because we pushed that down from the folder. We can adjust the permissions individually. Another important feature here is the jump to pin option. If you want to see the specific note that your players are looking at, you can use jump to pin to find out. This is also helpful if you're trying to figure out where you put the dang pin. I also wanted to demonstrate with the folder, it is pushing that change in permissions down to everything inside the folder at the time. Moving something into or out of the folder will not automatically change the permissions. We can see that the warning still shows up and is still limited even when I drag it out of the mill folder. Now I want to change some of these journal notes to have a observer permission. That way players can actually open it up and see what the journal entry looks like. So I'm setting both of the sacks to observer and the grindstone to observer. When I've set these to observer and I go back to my player view, we'll still see everything, but now if we double click on it, our player can actually go in and open it. And if they go to their journals directory, they can find each of these entries there. So this is really important to keep in mind if you're trying to hide the presence of a journal entry prior to getting to that scene. Another important note is that you do have to refresh the page for the player, that is, in order for them to actually be able to open things. And here I'm going to change the permissions on the player notes to be owner permissions. That way they can edit it and actually use it as a notepad. And I'm going to go ahead and rectify my error on the warning and make that one observer as well, so that my players can actually read the warning I gave them. Next, when we go back to the player view, we can see that they're able to see player notes and warnings, but they're not able to open them. Like I said, we need to do a refresh for those permission updates to take effect in terms of access. Now we can open up the player notes as a player and edit them, no problem, and add our thoughts, etc. One thing that's important to note is if you have multiple players editing the same note, if they save it, they may undo each other's progress. So you might want to do either a single dedicated note taker or a notepad for each player. You'll also notice that a player who is an owner of a journal entry that has a map note can move it around, but they cannot drag in a map note unless there's a specific setting enabled for them in your settings. So that's important to keep in mind. You'll notice that they can't do that on any of the observer permission notes. They also cannot delete a map note that they have owner permissions for. They can only edit the journal entry within it. So if we bring our character back to the front, we can kind of walk through this process. They'd click on the warning, see that they need to investigate a bit. The crates, they have limited permission, so there's just nothing in the crates. We might want to expand on that later and say that not every journal entry actually has context to it. If you can't open one, then there's just nothing to it. And here we can see the sacks. We again see this descriptive part, but we don't see anything secret. If my player made the check, they're writing in this specific note here of the sacks by the door. They're ready for transport to local bakeries. So as I mentioned in the secret part of that note, they're most likely to have been inspected, and therefore there's probably not anything in these sacks. So it's not even really worth searching them for. Again, they don't have this access to the secret that I wrote, but I could have asked for a check in order for that to pass. You'll note that as a player, if I own something, I can see the secrets, and I can also make things secret so that people who only have observer permissions can't see it. This is also really useful if you are using multiple player journals, and maybe everyone has observer permissions to each other's notes, but only the owners that actually edit it have the owner permission. That way they can have secrets from other players if they want. And just to drive that point home about the secrets, again, you can't see on the grindstone. So it's a really useful tool for being able to have notes to yourself, whether that's about environmental hazards or encounters or behaviors, or it is trying to do something where there's a specific check. And if my player did make the check, I could just really quick open it up, make something not secret anymore, and they can see it immediately. No refresh required for this change. It's only when you are changing observer permissions to owner or limited to observer that they need to refresh in order to access it. An important caveat with this kind of exploration-based encounter, it doesn't matter how far away or how close my token is, I can still open all of these map notes that I have observer or owner permissions to. I see them more clearly when I'm inside the building, and they would be obscured by the fog of war if I was in a non-journal notes tab. But if I had my journal notes open, I would be able to see these no matter where I was on the scene. So that's important to keep in mind. You can link journal entries together using something like Monk's active tile triggers or other modules in order to make this a little more immersive, where they have to be close enough to actually see something they want to click on. But just important to keep in mind. Another really useful feature of map notes, and probably the most obvious one, is just leaving notes for yourself. Again, by default, your notes are not visible to your players, so I'm creating a note about a trap of maybe if they climb up on this catwalk prematurely, they'll set off a trap and send flour everywhere and make it harder to find this device. And you'll notice that even though I added this directly to the folder, again, the folder pushes changes down to all the notes inside of it. It does not control their permission state all the time. So this trap does not have limited permission for players. It has the overall Foundry default of no permission for players. And I can configure this map note however I like. I tend to like purple for GM notes. It stands out well enough for me and just is clearly not something for players, at least in terms of my own color coding system. But you can use whatever you want, and you can use icons however you see fit and be as organized or chaotic as you like with your journal entries and map notes. This is also a good opportunity as I'm coming back in to maybe make certain things secret, or again, if I want to make things check, I can make this a DC 15 type of check, and the obvious would be investigation, but I like to let players just tell me what kind of thing they're going to roll. And obviously, if you're in a system other than D&D or another D20 based system, then you can use whatever skill or difficulty class makes sense to you. And here we have this nice encounter in a windmill where we're just trying to uncover a plot. There is a warning indicating that my players need to go around and look at all the different journal entries, and we've been able to see all the different configuration options we have with journal entries. You can use this to have a nice contextual point-and-click adventure a la something like Transylvania, etc. back in the day. And journal entries are a really powerful tool for keeping track of your own notes, and I hope that map notes have opened some doors for you. And I hope that this tutorial has been useful to you, whether you are an old hand at Foundry or you're brand new to the program. I hope that this has given you a better understanding of journal entries, what they're capable of, and how you can use them in your own games. Let me know if I missed anything in the comments down below, and let me know what topics you would like me to cover next. Thanks so much for watching. This has been Zephyr. Have a good one, and happy map making.